Thank you. Hope you had a good lunch. Hope you won't sleep over this. I'm not talking about science, so I'm just sticking to the facility side in this talk. I'm going to give a science talk later next week anyway, so if you have questions about science, just hold them till next week, or you can actually ask some of them who have actually done experiments here anyway. Right, so some of you may have seen this graph. So this is basically what's the point? Oh yeah, showing all the hyper lasers in the world. So if you go to the EQL website, International Council for High Intense Lasers website, you'll see this. So this is going to change drastically. I think it's actually changing as we speak. So if you do a sum of all the hyper lasers in the world, I think in the next few years it'll probably triple or quadruple once CLI comes online. So it'll be something like 50, 60 petawatts totally. Hopefully in the next decade or so it'll probably go to 100 petawatt or so. But in this talk we are just sticking to what we have in the UK. So we got about 4 hyper laser centers in UK. One is Central Laser Facility, where I come from. There is actually a copy of Vulcan. It's actually double copy of Vulcan. Let's say it's 2 beams in Orion, but that is it's a military lab. It's called Atomic Weapons Establishment, but that's not for public access. They got only about 10% of their access time for public usage. And Dino had just mentioned about SCAPA Center, which is actually, I think it'll be operational. The laser is operational. I think the experiments will start very, very soon, in the next couple of months or so. There is a Taranis laser in Queen's University, Belfast, up north somewhere here. Which is basically a nanosecond laser with about 30 joules or so, but I'm not going to talk about that in here as well. So I'll talk mostly about CLF and SCAPA. Right, so this is again, it's a very, very old graph. So this graph was produced about in 2012 when we had lots of hopes of getting money into CLF. So it's kind of a testament of what government funding can do to your program in terms of detrimental effects. So when we were plotting this graph, Gemini had just come online, and we were hoping to get a Vulcan 10 petawatt upgrade. Didn't happen. Apollon was planning to come online in 2014. It didn't happen either. It's just getting delayed by a couple of years. Actually, I think they'll start functioning this year, actually later this year. So the strategy, however, is true. Historically, UK has been at the forefront of intense laser science. The strategy actually was to get to the highest peak power possible in the UK. So we always had that in the last couple of decades. And only in the last few years we've had a blip because we haven't had upgrades to some of our facilities. So if you come to CLF is basically a conglomeration of multiple laser systems. We got a mixture of high power and low power systems looking at various aspects of laser science. So the 2 things that we are talking about today is Vulcan and Gemini. So you've heard these names before from the talks that you've heard in the last few days. We have another nominally hyper laser. It's more like the laser that you got in Hyderabad. It's called Artemis. It's used to drive high harmonics into soft X-rays and XUV range and getting into attosecond science. We got smaller power lasers as well, called Ultra and Octopus. We use them to actually track dynamics, fast dynamics inside material, for example, biological molecules, and image them. So you can actually get sub-nanometer resolution imaging using this thing called Octopus. We have an extensive computing facility that actually Raul is one of the administrators. He decides who gets access and who doesn't. In some ways, so most of the simulations that people do in the UK is actually using this SCARF lexicon. we have another arm of CLF. So this is something that we developed in the last 5 years or so. Since CLF actually has historically the expertise on hyper laser technology, we started actually spinning out into a commercial branch of CLF. We have started building next generation lasers, and then we are actually selling them to some of the customers around the world. Professor Tanaka being one of the customers. I think we have some systems going into Eli later on. We have already sold one to one of his neighbors in Prague, although he's in Romania. We have just sold one system to HiPEF in X-FEL in Hamburg. So that's basically the commercial division of CLF. And training, I'll come back to this. So training of next generation plasma scientists in the UK, which is actually a core program of CLF, and I'll tell you why that is important. So coming to Vulcan. So Vulcan is it's a fairly old laser system. So you might have you've heard Zolf complaining about the performance of Vulcan. It's partly because it's based on really old laser technology. It's based on flash lamp pumps, and it's a glass system. So not everything is perfect. Once you fire laser, it takes time to cool things down. So it takes about half an hour before you can fire next one if you're lucky. So on a good Vulcan laser day, Vulcan shot day, you'll get about 8 shots if you're really, really lucky. So that's what Vulcan is. It's got about 8 beams, 6 long pulse, and 2 that can be configured between short and long pulse. So we used to have 3 target areas: target areas West, East, and target area Petawatt. We have closed down one of the target areas. We closed down the East target area, but I'll talk about the next 2 target areas in the next couple of slides. So first up, target area West. So this is actually one of the more versatile areas of Vulcan, where we get all the beams of Vulcan into this area. 6 long pulse and 2 configurable short pulse system. So this is where, in fact, some of the first electron acceleration experiments before the dream beam work had been done. I think using Vulcan, where people have shown wave breaking and things like that. It's some variant of PA West. Coming to target area Petawatt, this is where we get the highest intensity possible. So you get about 500 joules in 500 femtoseconds, which makes it a petawatt. What you see behind is the compressor chamber. Okay, so it's a 13-meter compressor in folded geometry. So this, I used to have a man standing next to it just to compare the sizes, but it's enormous size compressor. It's one of the things that you should, when you come to RAL, you should come and visit us. It's something to see. So the beams are, it's about this big. The mirrors are that big as well. So the gratings are really big, nearly twice as big. And there's only one place in the world that actually can make such gratings. It's in the Livermore, and it's very, very, very expensive gratings. It takes more than a year to make. So from there, the beam comes from the laser through this. It's almost like a cone. You got 2 gratings, one here in this vacuum chamber. And what you see, what you actually don't see, is the target chamber is hidden behind this protective wall. So if you come to this area, one thing that you would notice, I don't have a picture for it, is the thickness of the wall. So it's about 1 meter thick concrete wall, and even with that, we have to locally shield the target chamber as well. So if you stand here on a Vulcan shot, you'll expose to something like 50 to 100 millisieverts in terms of dosage, and that's actually quite lethal. So you can't stand here when you fire. So all these areas are interlocked to make sure that nobody is trapped, nobody is standing there. So you cannot basically fire the laser when someone is standing here. So everything is controlled from all sides. That's kind of true for almost all our hyper laser areas. Partly because of laser safety and partly because of radiation safety, mostly because of radiation safety. So we've kind of covered the target chamber with lead and polyethylene. You have to use plastic to stop neutrons. And we kind of use this wall partly to shield some of our sensitive equipments. Otherwise, you cannot keep your computers in there because the electromagnetic pulse noise that you get is so huge that it can take out most of your instruments. So the stuff that we do in science, you've heard it all along the last few days. So the main aim of Vulcan is to enable research in top-notch research in high energy density science, ranging from one regime to another. Looking at, for example, warm dense matters, interiors of planets, interiors of stars, for example. You can recreate stellar conditions. So the stuff that Tony was showing earlier and Bob, recreating supernova explosions, generating magnetic fields from turbulence. This came up. This was done in Vulcan as well. It came up in Nature Physics. It's a Oxford experiment, Oxford-led experiment. It was judged as one of the top 10 physics breakthroughs in 2014 by Physics World. So the stuff that I talked about training. So this is where training in high energy density science is important for UK as a country. So if you look at the countries, mostly Western countries, actually it's not quite Western countries, all the countries that have really high power lasers in the world, one of their major aims is to actually enable good research in HED science, because this is one way to create conditions that you will have when you explode nuclear weapons, for example. So countries that have signed up to a comprehensive test ban treaty cannot test their nuclear weapons underground, and this is one way to create conditions like this. We don't do that quite in Vulcan. However, to have this capability for the country, you need to have plasma phases of right passport. So this is one thing that CLF actually does for the country to train high quality plasma phases who can actually do some of this research in more classified areas of science. So back to Gemini, the facility that I had. So when we opened Gemini we had just opened it as soon as I joined CLF. I joined CLF in 2007, and we fired the first shot of Gemini right before Christmas in 2007. So if it didn't work at that time, I didn't have anything to do with it. It's all John's fault. Since then, we've actually improved the system quite a bit. So I do take credit for that. So regardless, when we opened Gemini, that was the first high rep rate dual beam petawatt facility in the world. And some of it actually, some of this uniqueness still stays with Gemini. The idea about Gemini was you enable enough number of shots in a day so that you can actually convert some of the fundamental science that you did with lasers like Vulcan, which gave you only something like 8 to 10 shots a day, into applications where you can actually convert some of this cool science that you do into driving applications. I think Dino has taken it further with this 5 Hertz, which will come back in a minute. So Gemini, in a nutshell, it's got 2 beams, as the name Gemini suggests, 2 equivalent beams. Each beam has about 15 joules after the compression, but we don't typically operate at 15 joules, only in exception. If they really wanted to, we can get it to 15 joules. We typically operate at about 10 joules or so, because of at this intensity, you might remember what Tanaka-san said earlier on. The near field intensity without focusing is something like 3×10⁻², so very, very close to damage threshold. And the first optic that goes is the last grating, because that is the highest density. And gratings, since they have surface deformations by design, they have local field enhancements as well. So they actually see much higher intensity than normal optics. So we don't want to screw up the grading as frequently because it's quite expensive. It's about 50,000 pounds for one grading. We don't want to blow it up in one shot. So we don't really operate at extreme conditions usually. So Gemini, again, when it operates at its highest possible rep rate, is one shot every 20 seconds. So when we started, this actually was a step change in laser plasma science, because most high energy density science up till then were done with lasers like Vulcan, which you'll have like one shot wonders. So this actually brought statistics into the picture, and it's actually done. So nowadays, people actually complain that referees ask for statistics in papers. That's partly because of this. So Gemini again was an upgrade to existing laser system called Astra. So this is the Gemini laser area. So you can see the two identical arms. The white box basically is a pump laser, and the actual action, you need a good eye to see it. You can just probably see a pink dot here. That's the size of a crystal where it actually amplifies. So this is the final amplification stage. After that, you basically feed the pulse into two identical compressed chambers, and from then on, everything is in vacuum. All the propagation is in vacuum. So some of the parameters of Gemini, we got maximum intensity something like 10 to 21, baseline contrast less than 10 to 10. I think we can measure it 10 to 11 actually. So Gemini has two target areas, which actually uses the earlier part of Gemini called Astra, which goes up to something like 10 to 20 terawatt level, depending on what you try to do. But it's important historically because this is the area where the Dream Beam experiment was done, the stuff that Dino and Zulf were talking about. So some of the guys who were actually on that experiment, Stuart Mangles, Chris Murphy, and Alec Thomas, they're all still active researchers in the field. So this was actually during their run in 2003 actually. So the thing got published in 2004. I was not at the CLF at that stage. So from Astra, we take the laser into the Gemini laser area. The green boxes are again the pump lasers that you saw. That we amplify them in the red boxes. And I told you about the compressor chambers, and the target area is right below. So we send the beam after compression right below into the target chamber downstairs. So the two beams come there. So this Gemini that way has a unique capability to do pump probe studies at highest intensities possible. So we're still the only laser that actually has that capability that is really open access for users. So in Gemini target area, we got two geometries typically. One that use short focus, which is something like f2. We can go to f1, but the focus is not terribly good, so we don't really use that often. But if you use f2, we can actually get all the Gemini energy into something like 2 micron spot. And for, as Tanaka-san alluded in his talk, when you talk about high power lasers like this, which are really big beams, obviously you cannot get all the energy into the focal spot. So the end-circle energy that we can get with all the adaptive mirrors that we got is about 60%, which is it's not bad. So this is, getting enough energy into the focal spot is a research in itself in high power laser science. So this is how the focal spot looks like. You can start seeing the area rings outside. It's a finite size beam, so you cannot really get away from diffraction. We use a double plasma mirror system in Gemini to enhance the contrast further. So I don't know how many of you have seen a high power laser pulse before, but although people just talk about them being really short, none of the laser pulses at high power are really, really short, because they almost all of them have a long pedestal that is that's trailing behind it. We have done extensive research into this, and we now understand why that pedestal comes. It may be a fundamental issue of all these lasers. We think it's actually coming from the pulse stretching component in the laser. So when you stretch and compress, it actually comes because of the phase distortions that happen in the pulse. So although you got 10 to the minus 11 baseline contrast, when you are talking about really cutting edge experiments, what you don't want to do is to have any energy get into the laser at high intensity. For example, if you are focusing this laser, let's say to 10 to the 21, in here, you can actually see there's about, let's say, 4 picosecond before. If you don't do anything to the laser pulse, let's say 4 picosecond before, the contrast is 10 to the minus 5, so you'll have 10 to the 16 watts per square centimeter 4 picosecond before actually the peak of the pulse has reached. So what it means is, if you shoot nanometer level targets, which we normally do for ion acceleration, which I'll talk about again next week, you wouldn't have the target left in that time. So by the time the peak comes, the target would have gone. So in order to enable this, we have to clean the pulse even further. So this is the only known way to clean such a laser pulse even now, is to use plasma mirrors. So it's basically a glass plate coated with anti-reflection coating, and it doesn't activate until it gets to a certain intensity, and once it activates, it reflects. So basically, you can clean it up. So a pulse like Gemini, which is the black curve, after the plasma mirror, you can increase the contrast by 3 to 4 order of magnitude. So that's what we have to do every time we do solid target experiments. So some of the cool science that we do, again, I'm not going to get into this. Most of them are application-based. You've seen the mouse, you've seen the bone, you've seen, so this actually, Sylvia, from her experiment, accelerating nearly GeV energies in a centimeter long capillary. Most of the experiments that we do of late are application-driven to convert laser into secondary sources and use them for various applications. But we also do fundamental science studies. For example, this is Paul McKenna's experiment that came up in Nature Physics later this year, is to look at self-induced transparency. So if you remember Boson's talk, self-induced transparency, and using the light polarization to control the proton beam properties that is just going through the thin target after. This was Gianluca Sari's experiment. So if you remember Zolf's talk again, Zolf was involved in it. You basically generate equal amount of electrons and positrons just by the Trident process. You accelerate electrons and bank it into high Z solid, and by Trident process you generate positrons. You convert electrons into gamma rays and then gamma rays into positrons. So you can create a what they call a primordial soup of electrons and positrons, let's say. So it's actually really versatile area for both applications and fundamental science. So one of the unique aspects of CLF is, I'll rush through in the next couple of minutes, is our target fabrication facility. We can actually create unique targets that actually enable some of these unique experiments. We are again spun it out into a company. This company actually sells targets for hyper laser experiments all over the world, not just laser experiments. I think Nagasan was talking about some of the requirements for X-FEL, for example. So we do have a collaboration with them as well on this. So CLF has, in the last few years, taken a lead on generating next generation laser systems. So this, as I told, existing laser systems are based on an old technology called flash lamp technology, which limits the rep rate of the systems that you can generate. If you again want to go to more than a petawatt level, it's quite important. Up to a petawatt level, you can probably do still with flash lamps. But beyond that, it's going to be really difficult. So we have developed diode pumping technology to overcome this barrier. So we just produced a few months ago 100 joule 10 hertz laser. which is the highest average power. There's 2 laser systems such in the world now, one made by CLF and one by Livermore. I think Tanaka-san was showing the one from Livermore. Yeah. So one of them is sitting in Prague. The other one is being built for X-FEL in our lab. So this is where we are going to install this 100 joule 10 Hertz system in X-FEL in Hamburg. So what we want to do, if we get money, is to use this laser to take Gemini into the next stage, into 10 Hertz regime. And just like what Dino had in his university, actually divide, rather than doing everything in one area, which is kind of a big limitation for, just 1 minute, which is a big limitation at the moment in Gemini. Yeah. You have to switch between experiments, which takes up a lot of time. A better way of doing it is to actually split up into multiple target areas so that you can actually have configured geometries in all of them. So we are in the process of finding money for it. So the last nearly 1 year of my life have been actually writing business cases, not papers. Same true for Vulcan. So as I said, we were planning to build 10 petawatt laser several years ago. It almost got funded, but didn't quite. So we spent some more time on it. And meanwhile, the damage threshold of some of these components actually got improved. So which means that we could actually deliver slightly higher energy and come up with much shorter pulses as well. So the spec actually has gone up, and there is a joke that if you wait for long, it'll become 50 petawatt in the next few years. But we hope it doesn't happen. We hope it does get funded. So we just submitted a business case to government just a few weeks ago on this. So this will again is based on OPCPA technology that Vulcan has. This will take Vulcan into 400 joules and 20 femtoseconds, and you'll have a combination of a 20 petawatt and a 10 kilojoule long pulse in one of the target areas. So this will be a really cool system to access extreme conditions. This is why we want to do this. So all the extreme science that you've heard, things like generating QED, for example, in the lab, generating cosmos light conditions in the lab. This pretty much every order of magnitude in intensity kind of brings up new physics from experience. So this should take us to 10 to 23 easily. So you have seen this slide. So this is not the only laser center in the UK now. So the last couple of years, you know, this SCAPA center, they have just got the 350 terawatt laser working. I think you still have the 40 terawatt working, yeah? So you'll have, in some of the target areas that you have, you'll have, I take it you'll have some of the combinations as well? You don't combine them. But, okay, but you can actually do some of the test experiments with 40 terawatt and then bring it into the high intensity area. So as you've seen, again, they've actually split into multiple target areas. This is the right thing to do so that you can actually have configured geometries for some of these experiments. And basically, you lose a lot of time in ripping things apart and building them all over again. So again, this is a commercial system. It's flash lamp pump system. Thales is they've just tested it in. Has it tested it in Shatkara as well, or you have? Okay, excellent. So this again, since it is 350 terawatt, you can still use flash lamp pumping for this. There are Thales is actually selling lasers up to a petawatt at 1 to 5 hertz. I think they have plans to go to 10 hertz, but beyond that, this is going to be impossible. So coming back to the context of this workshop, access to these facilities is possible. People have access to it. We have had at least 4 or 5 joint experiments in CLF. I know Dino has an active program with some of you guys. So it is possible. At the moment, the only access route is through collaboration, unfortunately. as we go forward with some of the new funding schemes, we may have other possibilities as well, which we can discuss later. Thanks.
Thank you, Rajeev. Questions?